Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. My name is Harold. My friends sometimes call me Harry, and my old-fashioned colleagues address me by my full name. I have lived 57 years on this earth, most of them in the firm conviction that I understand the essence of family and marriage. I reside in a small town in the Midwest of the USA. Here, the landscapes are unassuming, the lawns are well kept, and in the evenings the streets sink into an amazing silence. I've grown accustomed to this rhythm, for as one grows older, a person usually becomes part of their familiar surroundings. I work at the local veterinary clinic. In my 20s, I adored horses, and once decided to become a professional capable of healing any creature. I realized that dream and have no regrets. Every day I meet people who cherish their pets. Perhaps I am the type who can give a kitten an injection, bandage a puppy's paw, and chat about the weather with its owner all at once. My wife, Vanessa, often laughed. You were born to save animals, yet there was a time when you simply wanted to conquer the city. I recall her smile, or rather, its early manifestations when we were both young and found joy in everything. We have been married for many years. I can hardly believe how quickly the decades have passed. It seemed like only yesterday that we danced to someone else's tune, peeked into the future, dreamed of our own home, and planned family trips across America. Now I own a cozy house. A neat fence surrounds it, and in front of the porch there is a flower bed. My wife works as an accountant at a firm in the neighboring district. We saved enough money to buy a comfortable car together and renovate our bedroom with a new wardrobe. Our measured life. I thought. I have a rather calm temperament. I enjoy sitting in a wide armchair in front of the television, cradling a cup of tea or coffee in my hands, and indulging in my thoughts. Vanessa, on the other hand, always craved adventure. It was as if she tried to fill the quiet evenings with boisterous stories about her colleagues or some excursion out of town. I would sometimes joke, I'm an old dog. I only need a couch and a book. Yet inside, I always felt a warmth toward her energy. Our temperaments complemented one another, although over time the passion had dimmed a bit. Sometimes we talked about it openly. Sometimes we let it go unsaid. I believe that such fluctuations were normal in married life. I remember how tense that recent Tuesday was. I was sitting in the clinic's office, studying new medications. I had to prepare for a complex operation on a dog whose owner was begging to save her beloved pet from an infection. Soft music played in my ears from my old player. The background noise lulled me into a light stupor, but I tried not to get distracted. At that moment, a message flashed on my mobile from my wife. The class reunion will be held on Saturday. Shall we go? I read it and froze. I usually wasn't fond of such events because there were too many loud conversations about the old days, photos where people tried to look better than they really were, and blaring music. Yet Vanessa radiated enthusiasm. She often mentioned how much she longed to see people from the past and relive memories. My graduation was many years ago, and hers was only 3 years later. The initiative had come from her school. A formal class reunion was planned in a restaurant hall. My wife did not want to miss the opportunity to show off her achievements. I could tell she was pondering over the style of her evening dress, looking for classic earrings. She dashed from room to room, repeating, "I need a beautiful hairstyle." Her excitement made me shrug, but I tried to support her. That night I tossed and turned in bed. Vanessa slept almost soundly. I looked around our bedroom. The frames with photographs on the bedside table, her down pillow, the light beige curtains that accentuated the muted glow of the street lamp outside. A question crept into my mind. Why don't we have any children? There was a time we had considered it, but time passed, problems arose, and then her frequent, complicated business trips. Many times it seemed we had postponed the steps we once planned. And now look at us. 2 people in a house with a chill sometimes passing between us. I wouldn't say we lived without affection, but the rare glances had lost their spark, and tenderness had slipped into mere habit. In the morning, as I was about to leave for work, my wife greeted me in the kitchen. She placed a plate of scrambled eggs before me and told me she planned to buy a new dress for the reunion. She described the color, the cut, comparing models she had seen online. I smiled and asked, "Aren't we spending too much for one evening?" She assured me, "This evening will be special. I guarantee it." I wasn't overly curious, but I noticed how her face lit up with a spark that hadn't been seen in a long time. I thought perhaps she missed seeing familiar faces. The week flew by. I loaded my old tools into the trunk and bought a new dog carrier for work. Meanwhile, my wife ran around the house, picking out jewelry and shoes. We left around 5 in the evening on Saturday. On the way, I silently observed the calm streets. Children chasing a ball, couples strolling hand in hand, and the wind gently stirring the tree crowns by the roadside. Vanessa scrolled through messages on her phone, occasionally laughing at some remarks from classmates who had already arrived. In the restaurant hall, the tables were arranged in a semicircle, and an atmosphere of that very reunion prevailed. Light music played, and stylish people in their 40s and 50s moved about. It seemed that in everyone's voice there were notes of, "We are young again," though wrinkles betrayed the passage of time. Vanessa looked attractive. A short-sleeved dress, her hair slightly lifted, her slender figure still preserved despite her age. I stood by her side, greeting strangers, trying to smile, though boredom was whispering inside me. Let this be over soon. But for her sake, I was ready to endure the evening. She suddenly exclaimed loudly upon seeing a man who looked vaguely familiar to me. I recalled his name was Brian. He and Vanessa had been friends back in our school days. In the past, I had noticed her encouraging smiles when he lingered near her. Now they were talking as if they were the closest of friends. Brian showered her with compliments and laughed. His graying hair gave him a slightly elegant air, although otherwise he appeared as a typical representative of those who wear a suit for the sake of formality. My wife played with the ends of her hair as she listened to him. I noted the gesture but did not attach much importance to it. I figured they were engaged in an innocent chatter about school romances and lost days of innocence. Later, I stepped away to the bar to grab a soda. I don't drink beer, and whiskey tires me out. Returning to our table, I found them dancing a slow dance in the center of the hall. Vanessa's back curved slightly as Brian held her by the waist. I saw her whispering something into his ear. Although other couples were around them, my attention was fixed on the two. An inner turmoil grew, as if I wanted to look away but couldn't. My heart clenched slightly, yet I thought, let her enjoy her nostalgia. I was not a jealous man by nature, though a part of my consciousness stirred. Warning, look closer. Close to midnight, many guests began to leave. I yawned and looked around for my wife. She flickered among the dancers, then disappeared with Brian behind some curtains where the changing room was located. I assumed they were going to say their goodbyes. Yet a disquieting stab of alarm built within me. 10 minutes passed, and she was nowhere to be seen. I began to look around again. People were departing. Musicians were packing up their equipment. Waiters were clearing the glasses. Finally, Vanessa appeared. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, her hair a bit disheveled, her gaze unfocused. "Harold, sorry. I got carried away talking." Brian was reminiscing about our school cheerleading team, sharing amusing stories. She explained and looked away. I didn't launch an interrogation. We left for home. The drive was silent. Vanessa blinked a few times, as if wanting to say something, but only sighed and stared out the window. I tried a few phrases, but she responded monosyllabically. Deep inside, I felt as though something important hung in the air, though no explanation was forthcoming. We went to bed close to 1 in the morning. I reached for her shoulder in hopes of a brief caress, but she merely shook her head and turned away. The warmth of our marital embrace had somehow vanished. All that remained was a weary sigh. The next morning came an ordinary Sunday. I got up, brewed some coffee, and set my cup on our old oak table in the kitchen. My wife, coming out of the bedroom, glanced around, reached for the box of cereal, and sat opposite me. She was silent, tapping her fingernails on the edge of the table. When I asked about plans for the day, she reluctantly mumbled that she would be busy mopping the floors and then was planning a short meeting with a friend. I nodded and closed my veterinary book. A pang of anxiety struck my heart, as if I sensed imminent changes. I tried to hold myself together. I figured that the burst of coldness could be explained by sheer exhaustion after a long evening. Perhaps someone had hurt her. I didn't want to extract information from her. My nature is straightforward, but I'm not one to pry words out of others. However, this time she seemed to be withdrawing, creating an invisible wall. I despondently said, "If you want to go somewhere, just say it." She nodded, got up, and left for the living room. A strange premonition lingered within me. Outside, the wind shook the curtains. The yard remained deserted. I retreated to my study, where our shared documents lay, along with old photographs, and the computer with a couple of programs for the clinic's reports. I placed my car keys on the table, and my eyes inadvertently drifted to her bag, forgotten on a chair. Vanessa often stashed everything there, including my receipts, discs with movies and brochures. I was surprised to see a USB flash drive lying nearby without its cap. It appeared not to be mine. On it, in silvery paint, was written, "Reunion Video." I squinted. My heart skipped a beat at a vague suspicion. Perhaps it was a recording of our party. I decided to check it quickly, thinking it might just contain ordinary footage of the graduation. I connected it to the computer, opened the folder. There was an untitled file, a video format. I pressed play. At first, the screen showed the corridor of the restaurant. Then the camera turned toward a black door labeled "Staff." Faint music came from outside. Then came a sudden shift in focus. People appeared in the frame. One of them was Brian. Next to him stood my wife. They looked at each other. As if in a bad dream, I didn't immediately comprehend what was happening. Then I saw her pressing close to him, his hand sliding over her hips. My mouth went dry. She whispered something into his ear, and he let out a short laugh. His hands began unzipping her dress. The camera's focus wavered. The sound fluctuated between louder and softer. But for several seconds, the video captured their kiss, and the moment Vanessa wrapped her arms around his neck. A moment later the image jerked, but it was unmistakably clear that she was pressing against him in all her feminine openness. I sat there, not taking my eyes off the screen, not even blinking. Those seconds seemed like an eternity. My mind went numb. On the recording, someone made a muffled sound. The camera quickly shifted, and the image disappeared. The recording lasted less than a minute, yet it showed me far more than I could bear. I removed the flash drive and closed the program. Silence reigned in the study, broken only by the rustling of the trees outside. I placed my hand on the table and realized I was breathing as heavily as after a run. I stared at the door as if expecting Vanessa to burst in any moment, smile, and say it was all a joke. But no one came in. A wave of fury mixed with disgust surged inside me. My back broke out in cold sweat. I couldn't believe that my wife had slept with another man, right under our noses in front of dozens of people, and now she walked around the house pretending everything was fine. At that moment I understood. Our former life was falling apart at the seams. My unwavering certainty had collapsed. But who had recorded that video? And why? It was as if it was left there for display. Perhaps she herself had saved the footage, planning to forward it. Or she had lost the flash drive and hadn't managed to delete the files. I didn't know the details, but 1 minute of video was enough. Thus began my personal catastrophe. That very hour I rose, looked around at the photographs on the shelf, our shared snapshots by the lake, the trip to the park, the embraces at Christmas. The warmth they once radiated now scorched me. I felt as though I had been hit with a blow to the gut. No tears came. Rather, an icy emptiness took over. I jumped into the car and drove along the city streets aimlessly. I didn't know which way to turn. I needed to calm down a little before demanding an explanation. The shift in reality was distinctly palpable. I was overwhelmed. I parked by the roadside and rested my head against the steering wheel. Heavy thoughts pounded me. Why her? Why in this way? How many times has this been going on? A trembling anxiety swept through my body. In my memory, that minute of video reappeared. The dimly lit room, a man's hand on her back, soft moans, a kiss. The image pierced me. I clenched my jaw. Half an hour later, I returned home. I found Vanessa in the living room, mopping the floor by the fireplace. I glanced at her face. She stopped, frowned, and asked, "Did you go somewhere?" I nodded, sat on the sofa, and remained silent. She lingered near me. Then she couldn't hold it in any longer. Did something happen? Her voice was cautious. I took the flash drive from my pocket and placed it on the table before her. I noticed her eyes widen. She froze, her lips trembling. I asked, "Where is this from?" Vanessa swallowed hard. She stood silent for a long moment, then softly said, "You watched it?" I replied, "Yes. I saw everything." I heard a tremor in my own voice. She snatched the device, clutched it in her fist, then dropped it onto the floor. Afterwards, she cupped her face with her hands. I demanded an explanation of what had transpired between her and Brian. When, and how many times. She didn't know what to say. I saw her panicky gestures. Finally, she whispered, "I don't understand how it happened." I cut her off, raising my voice. "Enough. I need the facts." "When? Where? How many times?" She bit her lip and fell silent. I felt a growing anger that threatened to explode into a furious scream. I stormed from my seat, paced the room, nearly knocking over a vase. I returned to her and demanded, "Explain why you did this." Vanessa lowered her eyes and murmured, "After a couple of cocktails, I lost control. He's an old acquaintance. We were talking about the past. Suddenly, some attraction flared. I swear, it was a mistake." "I'm as shocked as you are." I interrupted her. "A mistake? Is that what you call it?" My chest boiled. "How did it all happen? Did you fall into the arms of your ex as if our marital bond meant nothing?" I struck the table hard with my palm, producing a dull sound. Vanessa flinched and took a step back. Her hand trembled as she gripped the edge of the chair, as if fearing that I might lose control. I had no desire to smash dishes or hurl objects. Inside, there was another fire, cold and vengeful, one that nearly consumed me. I asked if she had called him after the reunion. She nodded silently. "We exchanged messages sometimes. He said he missed me." I replied, but it was more of a flirtation. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't listen. I was overcome with disgust. There she was, the woman I loved and had spent years with, and now all those years were shattering into fragments because of her tryst with an ex. I tried to keep my voice steady. "So this recording, why is it in your possession?" My wife exhaled gloomily. "It seems he was recording something on his phone." I had no idea. Later he sent the video to a flash drive, intending to. She bit her lip, trailing off. It appeared that the ex-boyfriend had been keeping his own personal film, and Vanessa had tried to confiscate it to destroy it, but she lost the medium. The room around us seemed frozen in time, with only the soft shadows from the windows gliding over the walls. Suddenly a wave of nausea struck me when I imagined Brian probably rewatching those scenes, hearing her half whisper. My stomach clenched with a primal rage. I sat down, covering my face with my hands, and whispered, "How could you? We've spent our lives together. Was it really that you were missing something?" Vanessa reached out to me, wanting to touch my shoulder, but I recoiled. "Don't come near me," I said. Red streaks filled my eyes, and my heart pounded at my temples. I replayed the scenes in my mind. Her naked body in someone else's arms, another man's lips on her skin. A torturous vision. Even the imagined smell of another man's cologne enraged me. My mind screamed, Brian was where your embrace once belonged only to you. Inside, everything churned. Vanessa swayed, sat down opposite me, and curled her arms around her knees like a small, guilty child. She said, I'm sorry. I understand I've destroyed everything. It will never happen again. That incident. I brusquely cut her off. How can I believe you after this? She closed her eyes. After a pause, I rose and headed for the door. I closed it behind me, descended the stairs to the car, and slammed the door angrily. I drove with no destination in mind. I simply did not want to remain in the same space with her. I stopped at a 24-hour convenience store. I went in, bought a bottle of water. I could feel the cashier's gaze on me as I mumbled thanks. Apparently, my look was too tense. Then I stood by the car, hesitating to return home. Over and over I replayed the video in my head. Those short seconds, the alarm bell ringing inside. When I returned home, it was late evening. A light glowed in the corridor, while the rest of the house was shrouded in darkness. Vanessa sat on the sofa with slumped shoulders. When I appeared, she looked up but said nothing. I softly said, I need some time alone. I walked past her into the bedroom and closed the door. I lay there in the dark all night, my mind tormented by nightmares. I imagined them being intimate, and I was overwhelmed by a mad desire for revenge. With my eyes closed, I saw silhouettes, heard strangled moans, and her face shone with a passionate pleasure, one I hadn't felt from her in a long time. I woke up in the morning with a bitter taste of anger on my tongue. I got ready and silently drove to the clinic. I was scheduled to perform an operation, but my hands trembled slightly. The patient was a young Labrador. The owner looked at me with hope. I tried to focus, taking a deep breath. I had to recall my professional skills. An hour and a half later, the dog recovered and the operation was complete. The owner thanked me, though she noted my strange detachment. I stepped outside and stood by the clinic door. A familiar colleague, a therapist, asked if everything was all right. I answered in a dull tone, family problems. He didn't press further, evidently sensing my state. I stood there watching the passing cars, thinking one thing. What should I do next? Burn that flash drive? Kick Vanessa out of the house? Truthfully, I didn't want to make a decision in the heat of emotion. But deep down I knew, this crack in our life would never heal. Around 7 o'clock I returned home. I was met by the clinking of glasses in the kitchen. My wife seemed to be sitting there with a glass of white wine. I entered. She looked at me with dull eyes and quietly murmured, I'm sorry, though I know it's useless. She took a sip of wine. I sat opposite her, my hands resting on my knees. There were no words, and what could be said at a moment like this? Silence weighed heavily. Then she began. I want to explain. And she recounted the details. It turned out that Brian had once been her first love. They had dated for a few months in school and broke up when he moved away. Now he was divorced and had come to the reunion. Vanessa herself didn't notice how old memories resurfaced, how an old passion ignited. From her words, it seemed that the physical intimacy happened spontaneously, although that man had apparently stoked the situation with alcohol and flirtation. I heard, I never thought I'd do something like this. I was lacking attention. He acted like a young man, whispering that I was the most beautiful. I listened as if watching a movie about someone else's life. At the mention of beauty, I shuddered. She stood there apologetically, pleading for forgiveness. I maintained a cold mask. I interrupted her. Did you not realize you were tearing our marriage apart? Or did you know and just not stop? Vanessa flinched and drained her glass. I sighed, rose and said, there is no turning back now. I closed the bedroom door right in front of her eyes. I could hear her quietly crying behind the door. The days that followed were filled with constant tension. Our home was plunged into a deathly silence. My wife tried to talk to me, but I evaded her. I felt like a man who had lost his anchor. Every day at the clinic I performed operations, bandaged paws, and conversed with clients. But in my mind the refrain, "She cheated," kept echoing. When I came home, she sat with a vacant look, preparing dinner. But I barely touched my food, drank a cup of tea, and went upstairs. One day, she crossed the threshold of my room and softly said, "Please, let's talk. We've spent many years together. Is it really over?" I simply replied, "I can't stand your presence." I noticed her shoulders trembling. Her look said she was willing to beg, but I slammed the door in her face. It wasn't so much the fact of betrayal that tore me apart as the vivid images. I read short articles where people described the pain of jealousy, but reality was far worse. I kept recalling how she had tied my tie on our wedding day, and now her hands were gently sliding over another man's shoulders. Memories piled up. Her smile, her care, our goodnight kisses. And then, phantom foreign fingers on her body, foreign whispers. Later, I tried to confide in an old friend. His name is Harriet. Friends jokingly note that it's an odd name for a man. But in our town, more unusual names are not uncommon. He worked as a mechanic at an auto repair shop. We met one evening after work, and I dropped by with the words, "I need a beer, or I'll lose my mind." He understood that the situation was serious. We sat at a broad workbench, where nuts and tools usually lay, and he opened 2 bottles. Breathing in the smell of machine oil, I blurted, "She cheated on me." Harriet whistled and gave me a sidelong look. "Damn, man, when did it happen?" I explained that everything had come to light after the reunion. He squeezed my shoulder and said he never liked meeting up with old classmates. Too many unresolved desires from the past. It sounded bitter, as if affirming my pain. We drank, and I poured out my memories. Harriet listened, nodded, and occasionally remarked, "People change. It might be due to emptiness, loneliness, a random impulse." But his words passed over my mind. I stubbornly repeated, "She trampled all over me." Deep inside, the thought of revenge slowly took shape. I believed that filing for divorce was too simple an exit. My hands itched, longing to teach Brian a lesson. Yet I understood that acting rashly might land me in jail, or worse. Still, visions began to form in my mind of how I would choose to punish both of them. My anger turned icy, solidifying into a clear intention. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued living in our house. She avoided loud conversations, moving about on tiptoe around me. One day I caught her in the bedroom, where she was hiding some photo albums in the closet. She froze like a thief caught red-handed. I stepped closer and saw our old anniversary photos, snapshots from trips. She was trying to hide them, apparently not wanting me to tear them apart in my rage. But I couldn't care less about those pictures. I looked at her coldly and said, "Don't try to soften what can never be restored." She closed the closet, and without a word, left. Every day I took steps to sever all ties with her, yet something held me back. Perhaps the wound demanded a more dramatic final. I began to dig inside myself. Why don't I just kick her out? The faint remnants of feeling battled with my anger, fueling an inner conflict, and the thought of revenge wouldn't let go. I hardly doubted that I would eventually do something radical. One evening, as I sat in the kitchen staring at my cup, Vanessa entered and timidly asked, "May I explain? I want to tell you how it happened." I sneered maliciously, "You've already said enough." But she did not leave. She sat opposite me, drumming her finger on the countertop as if gathering courage. Then she said, "I felt that we were drifting apart. Your silence, your indifference. I wanted comfort, I wanted." She hesitated, frowned, and looked up. "This isn't an excuse. You set the trap for yourself." And then it was too late. My anger burst forth. I croaked out, "You wanted another body. A younger one. Or did you think that would solve our problems?" She fell silent, tears streaming down her cheeks. I saw her pain, but I felt no sympathy, only a grim satisfaction. Let her suffer. New days dawned. Over breakfast, Vanessa pleaded, "I need to go to work, but we can't live like this. I'm begging you. Let's see a psychologist." I exhaled heavily. Why? So they can share their secrets on how to forget your intimacy with Brian. My voice carried such bitterness that she shrank back, grabbed her purse, and dashed out of the house, leaving me boiling with emotions. About a day later, I visited a lawyer. He explained the divorce process and requested documents. I sat across from him, arms folded, barely responding to his formal questions. His face expressed polite business-like efficiency. Divorce is simple if both sides agree on the division of assets. I nodded knowingly, though another plan churned in my mind. Divorce would be the final step, but first I intended to settle accounts with that sweet couple. Around that time, I recalled that Brian often mentioned where he lived. He had once worked as an insurance agent in another state, and recently moved closer so he could be near his elderly mother. I figured he did not expect me to show up. I wrote down his address, recalling details from conversations with my wife. Then I returned home, where Vanessa barely questioned me. Her sullen looks were enough for her. At night I lay awake for hours, imagining how I would strike back. Initially, I had wanted to storm over with a baseball bat, but I knew that was too straightforward. I'd be fired, arrested, and my whole life would crumble. My fury demanded a subtler retribution. I scrolled through a few online guides about minor sabotage against people, but I hesitated. I did not want to become just an ordinary thug. I settled on the idea that I wanted to break their fates, to make them taste their own medicine. Meanwhile, my colleagues at the clinic noticed my sullen mood. A receptionist asked, "Perhaps you need a vacation." I waved her off, saying I would manage. From morning until evening I dealt with animals, sometimes getting angry when someone was late for an appointment. I felt a storm building within me. One evening Vanessa confessed, "I can't sleep at night. It torments me to realize everything is ruined." I gave her a sidelong glance and said nothing. I think she was hoping for reconciliation, but my heart had turned to stone. I continued to play the role of the cold husband, waiting for the right moment. A week later, I gathered together my documents, my passport, marriage certificate, some papers related to the house. I hid them in the safe in my study. I steeled myself. After several sleepless nights, the plan matured. I would set a trap for Brian, draw him into a conflict that would be fatal for him. Then I would file for divorce, leaving Vanessa with nothing but bitter fragments. At Harriet's garage I managed to borrow some old fuel cans. I told him I wanted to dispose of some gasoline. He didn't ask questions, noticing my mood. I carefully placed the cans in the car, hiding them under a tarp. That evening at home, I opened my laptop and searched for information on the street where Brian's house was located. My wife wandered around, trying to start ordinary conversations, as if we were about to reach some sort of agreement. I pretended I had my own work worries. Meanwhile, she slowly began to pack away all our albums, removing souvenirs we had given each other on our anniversaries. It seemed she herself understood that the logical end was near. I didn't offer an exit. I lay in wait. I stared at her pale face, at the wedding ring she still wore, and all the while my mind churned with thoughts of revenge. One evening I received a notification. A visit might be required for a client. A dog bit its owner. Nothing extraordinary, but I gathered myself and left. Driving along the outskirts, I suddenly changed direction sharply, heading to the area where, by my guess, Brian lived. My heart pounded. It was dark. Streetlights cast a dim yellow glow over the roads. I drove slowly, scrutinizing house numbers until I saw a sign that matched the information I'd gleaned from my wife. I parked and observed from a distance, a small one-story cottage with bushes by the porch. A light glowed in the kitchen window. My imagination kindly presented a scene. Brian sitting inside, surely planning his next antics. Maybe he was inviting someone on a date. Perhaps he was texting my wife, teasing her with reminders. I got out of the car and made my way to the backyard. I crept among the bushes, examining the windows. I considered in my mind, where could I douse gasoline so that if I set a fire, it would catch? A fleeting thought occurred. What if his elderly mother is inside? I wouldn't want to kill her. But the anger would not relent. I stepped back and waited a little longer. I saw Brian step onto the porch to smoke. Under the lamp's light I could see his face clearly. The corners of his mouth curved, an unshaven chin, a relaxed posture. I stood in the darkness, fists clenched. I wanted to jump out and push him off the porch, but I held back. That wasn't part of my more cunning plan. In my mind, I was already preparing the moment when I would find a way to strike precisely. The next day I got up with a heaviness in my chest. I went to the bathroom, turned on the water, and stood under the warm spray, recalling the scenes from that video. I imagined my wife moaning as she embraced Brian. Each time, a fierce hatred flared inside me. Finally, I decided to act immediately. I packed a bag with the fuel cans, left for the outskirts of the city. I bought a bottle of strong alcohol, planning to pour it on the spot to create the impression that a drunken brawl had led to a fire. In my head, I constructed the scenario. I'll drive under cover of darkness, pour gasoline by the back wall, and set it on fire. The house will blaze. I'll leave, leaving him roofless. Perhaps he might survive, but he will know who did it. Then rational fear struck. What if the police find evidence? But my fury overcame any caution. In the morning, I received a call from the insurance company's office regarding some financial issues with the house. I answered mechanically, but my thoughts were consumed by the impending fire. In the evening, after leaving the clinic, I got into my car, my heart beating wildly. I arrived in Brian's neighborhood and stopped by the roadside. I looked around. Some street lights were out, and no pedestrians were near the houses. I made a brief trip to the fence. Retrieving one of the cans, I struggled to remove its cap and began quietly pouring the liquid into a corner of the yard, closer to the wooden part of the extension. Suddenly, a door slammed from inside, and footsteps were heard. I jumped behind a trash bin. Brian came out, fiddling with his phone, then went back inside. I waited a few minutes until he disappeared again. I finished my task, my trembling hands tearing off a piece of cloth, soaking it in gasoline. I fumbled for my lighter. My heart pounded as if trying to break free of my ribcage. A thought flashed in my mind. What if his mother is inside? Will she burn? But my eyes were blinded by the thirst for revenge. I flicked my lighter, and a small flame danced. The dry grass caught fire. I moved the rag closer to the wall. The flames quickly licked up the wooden boards. I heard a light crackle. I jumped back, dashed to my car, started the engine, and sped away. The rearview mirror reflected an orange glow. My lips were set in a grim line, my fingers trembling on the steering wheel. I drove off without looking back. I returned home close to midnight. Goosebumps crawled over my body. Vanessa sat in the corridor, watching me intently. She asked where I had been. I grumbled. Out for a walk. I passed by and locked myself in my room. Inside, adrenaline roiled. It's done. I hoped the flames would accomplish their work. The next morning, a local radio station reported a fire in one of the residential houses. Fortunately, there were no casualties, though the fire damaged an extension. There was no mention of casualties. I frowned. So Brian wasn't killed. Most likely, he would have to pay for the repairs. Most likely, the police wouldn't find any evidence since I hadn't left a trace. Yet I felt that this was only half the battle. Later that evening, Vanessa heard me chuckle briefly while turning off the radio. She asked, "What made you laugh like that?" I sneered. Revenge sometimes brings a strange pleasure. She furrowed her brows. "What are you talking about?" I withdrew to the second floor. A couple of days later, I learned that Brian had filed a police report, claiming it was arson. But they had no leads. Presumably, he suspected me but had no proof. I pictured him fuming in his damaged house. Inside me, a dark satisfaction mixed with a burning, unyielding anger. Every time I looked at my wife, I saw the ghost of that amorous scene. That night, I heard her wandering the house and moaning in her sleep. Perhaps nightmares tormented her. In the morning I got up, waited for her to come out of the bathroom, and said, "I've made my decision." She looked at me cautiously. I stated bluntly, "I'm divorcing you. The papers will be ready soon. I'm taking the house. You won't have a peaceful life here." Her face turned pale. Her lips trembled. "Please, Harold, don't destroy everything. I know I'm at fault, but can't we try to start over?" I laughed coldly and bitterly. "Start over? After what you've done? No, I'm filing for divorce and want you out immediately. Not today, but by tomorrow." She gasped, tears welling in her eyes, and her voice rose to a scream. "I'm repentant. Do you hear me? I'm begging." I brushed her hand away that had reached for my shoulder and growled, "Don't touch me." I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. "Prepare the documents. I've made up my mind." Vanessa sank onto a chair, pressing her fingers to her temples. The room was saturated with an atmosphere of utter despair. The next day, I went to the lawyer's office and signed the divorce papers. According to local laws, the process isn't instantaneous, but for me the important thing was to mark the beginning of the end. The lawyer asked if I planned to claim the jointly acquired property. I stated firmly that the house would be mine, and she could either move in with her relatives or rent an apartment. He agreed, warning that there might be some court disputes. I merely shrugged. I returned home. Vanessa sat on the sofa, crumpling a handkerchief in her hands. Upon hearing about the documents, she burst into tears. I moved to the window and watched the street. I muttered, "You've signed your own death sentence. I'm sorry it ended like this." She tried to justify herself, talking about how she loved me and wanted to keep the family together. I shook my head. Inside, a cold emptiness prevailed. I knew the final word had been spoken. For the rest of the day I passed by her without speaking. She pleaded, "Talk to me, please, don't do this." But in my eyes, there was only ice. Toward the evening I said, "Pack your things. Tomorrow you move out to wherever you like, just not here." She sat there, biting her lip. Then she rose, gathered her suitcase. In one moment, she dropped our photograph, a picture of us embracing by the fireplace, onto the floor. The glass cracked lightly. She picked up the photo, now crushed in the corner of its frame, held it to her chest, and shed a tear. I felt not an ounce of pity. Later, I watched her as she loaded her belongings into the car. In the last moment, she turned around as if she wanted to run to me. But I clenched my fists and stared grimly without a word. She lowered her eyes, closed the car door, and drove away. The yard fell into silence. I stood there, breathing in the night air. It was all over. My wife was gone, the house remained mine, and her lover had been punished, perhaps not fatally, but painfully. The next day, a notification from the bank about our joint account arrived. I ordered that part of the funds be frozen and called my lawyer, explaining that I had grounds to demand a larger share of the property. He confirmed, "That's possible, given her infidelity." He looked at the stack of papers. Our shared life had turned into a collection of formalities. Ironic, what a final for a long marriage. But I did not relent. A day passed. On Monday, I left the house and felt the piercing freshness of the wind. I caught myself thinking that the constant tension that had bound me for the past month was finally gone. I tossed my briefcase with the papers into the car and headed to work. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw a haggard face with sharp features. I looked older than my years. The wrinkles had deepened, and a grim glimmer had settled in my eyes. Yet inside I suddenly discovered a strange resolve to move on. In the clinic's parking lot, I stepped out and looked at the neighboring cars. A memory flared in my mind of how not long ago I sat there, tormented by jealousy, and now it was all behind me. It was as if I had squeezed the pus from a wound. Let the scars remain, but life goes on. The betrayal stripped away my illusions, and I underwent a breakdown that transformed me into another person. My colleagues greeted me. I answered briefly, without much of a smile. I took the schedule of patients and checked the records. For a while, I carried on with my habitual actions. Suddenly, the owner of a cat asked why I looked so gloomy today. I glanced at him and nearly exploded, but I restrained myself. Then, after he left, I leaned against the wall. I understood that what I had experienced wouldn't vanish in an instant, and the guilt over my arson wouldn't simply evaporate. I had stepped onto a dangerous path, and any joy from it was highly dubious. At the end of the workday I left, casting a glance at the sunset beyond the horizon. I exhaled sharply, feeling a sudden surge in my chest. I returned to a house that now felt empty, where everything reminded me of our former coziness, our shared bed, matching cups, and our photos on the wall. A deathly silence reigned. I went into the bedroom, collapsed onto the bed, and stared at the ceiling. I lay there for an hour or more without moving. Then I remembered how I used to wait for Vanessa from work long ago, with a bouquet of roses. The warmth of those moments had died. My fingers clenched involuntarily. The following days dragged on slowly. I listened to the local news, reading updates on the investigation of the arson. Apparently, the police didn't give the matter much attention, dismissing it as an accident. Brian couldn't prove my involvement. Sometimes I imagined him fuming in his ruined house, and a bitter, angry smirk would cross my face. I realized that there was no turning back. Perhaps one day he might try to take revenge, but for now everything remained quiet. Finally, the time came for the court hearing regarding the divorce. Vanessa agreed to the terms so as not to exacerbate the conflict. We met in the courtroom. She stood there wearing the wedding ring she never took off. I noticed her empty eyes. She avoided meeting my gaze. The lawyer announced that I was claiming the house, some bank accounts, and the car. She would receive a modest compensation and the right to take her personal belongings. The judge formally asked if we wished to settle everything amicably. I replied, "The decision is final." Vanessa did not object. After the hearing, we crossed paths in the corridor. She approached and whispered, "I never thought it would come to this." I snorted, "Was your ex more valuable than our marriage? I hope you're happy." She shook her head. "We're not together. It's all over." I spread my arms indifferently. Now we each go our separate ways. Her lips trembled and a tear sparkled in her eyes. I walked past her. Thus ended our marriage. I stepped out onto the courthouse steps, pausing to gaze at the gloomy sky. I ordered myself, from now on, exist without looking back. The feeling of emptiness was sharp and painful, yet behind me lay the wreckage, including myself. The thirst for revenge had consumed me, and I had satisfied it. But the triumph tasted bitter. At the same time, I had gained freedom from the past and stepped into an uncertain future alone. Months later, I still live alone in this house. I'm considering selling it and moving elsewhere, where nothing will remind me of those nightmarish moments. Every time I pass a mirror, I see the man who crossed moral boundaries. However, I no longer feel remorse. This story left a deep scar, and I continue to exist without illusions. Veterinary work remains my refuge. I still save four-legged lives, though I have grown darker. My colleagues ask no further questions. My life has taken a new course. Sometimes thoughts cross my mind that perhaps I was cruel. I deprived a man of his home, shattered my wife's life. But I silenced those thoughts by reminding myself, she brought it upon herself by crossing the forbidden line. And if anyone asks if I regret it, the answer is obvious. Regret won't bring back who I was, so I move forward. Need I mention that my friends distanced themselves after learning about my divorce? Some decided it was because of irreconcilable differences. I did not go into the details. Vanessa's relatives tried calling and leaving messages, but I ignored them. I closed all channels for her presence in my life. Is there any chance of meeting her somewhere? Sometimes people bump into each other in a supermarket or on the street. I prefer not to speak. My soul is empty, and there is no place in it for her. Sometimes at night I dream of the past, our wedding vows, our warm family evenings. I wake up in a cold sweat, go to the window, and see moonlight sliding over the furniture where we once sat together. It makes me slightly uneasy, but I return to bed and lie there, staring into the darkness. The past cannot be restored, and the future may accept me without any promises of happiness. And I, Harold, a veterinarian from a small town, have come to realize our love was not unbreakable. That is my conclusion. My wife lost the family, her lover lost the house, and I lost my naive faith in people, transforming into someone who knows how to respond brutally to betrayal. The story is closed, and now all I do is remember the smell of burning, the roar of the flames, and the last tears shed in that courthouse. The end.